Hello, good evening from Freiburg, Germany, and welcome to IDAGIO and to our workshops on the Bach cello suite. Tonight, the Prélude from the third suite. Maybe today I will just play a little before I start talking. So, the first thing that is striking in this beginning and in this prelude, besides its wonderful generosity, its joviality, I hope that's a right English word, is the fact that it's written almost exclusively, except for the first two bars, in 16th note. All the same values. As you might remember, he did the same in the first prelude. It's going to be the same in the sixth suite, in triplets, if one can call it that way, in 12/8. So always the same value, this idea of a moto perpetuum in a way, which puts the harmony in the center, because we are not working like we did in the prelude of the second suite on motifs and very differentiated, articulated and ornamented motifs. Here we will have this effect of the moto perpetuum, which gives an energy, and I think it's not by chance that the preludes I just mentioned, all these preludes that use this one value through the whole movement, are actually the four major suites: 1, 3, 4, which I didn't mention before, with only 8 notes for the first part at least, and then there is a big cadenza, and we will talk about it, of course, when we come to it, and the fifth, and the fourth, and the sixth suite. And the two suites in minor use a much less systematic language in a way, and a much more articulated motivic language. Now, there is a question that has come from some of you, and that, to be honest, I had to deal with for myself many times when working on these preludes, on these 4 moto perpetuum preludes, and also that we have talked a lot about with my students, actually no later than yesterday, in a lesson on this prelude. And the question that comes again and again is, if I have this value, this 16th note going through the whole piece, how do I differentiate? How do I phrase? How do I make my agogic? Well, on which, based on what? And yesterday in the lesson, in our dialogue with Judith, who is in my class, we came to a very interesting thought that basically what will guide us for our timings, for our phrasing, is a sort of golden rule that again put a hierarchy in what is the first rule, and on this first rule I can then apply other rules. And I came to this strange idea, strange metaphor of like a constitution of a country, you know, like by curiosity I went then to look at the French constitution, for example, which so the first thing in the preamble, so before you put Article 1, you know, it's the freedom of each individual is at the center. That means that whatever you're going to write in the Constitution afterwards is going to be will have to respect that preamble. The US Constitution, we the people, and I think the first thing that comes is the union, and also I think the freedom of speech, the freedom of idea. And again, these are put at the center in first, because everything that comes after will have to respect this. Well, you might ask yourself, where is he going? Well, I realized yesterday when we were working on it in this lesson that the only way to make an agogic, a rubato, if you want to call it this way, a phrasing that makes sense is if you put first, and for this there is no, that's non-negotiable, so to say, you put first that your bass line, in other words, the slower values, the sometimes quarter notes, in this case, sometimes whole bar, that this note, that this bass line is going to make sense musically, is going to groove, and that this is not tangible. Well, the way you will interpret this bass line is tangible, and each one of you, each one of us will play it in a different way. But that whatever I do with my small notes within this, with my 16th note, it is always going to respect this bass line and the way it is phrasing, one could say the way it's grooving. So I'll take an example at the beginning. Yes, after the first bar is a sort of scale. It could be quite free. I think it's not yet installing the rhythm. Yes, it's a scale and an arpeggio. Right. From here, now, the exercise I just did now, which is to play a bass line and to sing the actual text that we have, is something that I have been doing a lot, that I do all the time, again and again, when I lose a little bit my phrasing and when I need to remind myself how is this music going. And this is something I strongly encourage everyone to do. This is incredibly helpful and makes a lot of sense. So just to give, sometimes it's helpful to give a negative example in order to really make the point. So if I do I know it's quite ridiculous what I'm doing now, but I'm trying to show that now I am busy with the small notes, and by making I lost my pulse. There is no pulse. The breathing is not there anymore. I didn't respect Article 1 of the Constitution. So I just wanted to make, that was actually the main point that I wanted to make today, because I think it's very important, particularly in these motu perpetuum movements. So, how does this piece go on after we arrive to this beautiful G major? Isn't that beautiful, the way he... It's a very simple sequence. Remember, we had the same thing in the Allemande of the first suite, where a very simple sequence, but it's so compelling, it's so beautiful. Now we start our journey. We modulate to D minor, A minor. So we have modulated, and then he modulated to A minor. And instead of going on, so he again insists on this cadenza in A minor in a way, so he's showing us I'm going to take A minor seriously, and we are going to stay there for a while. And the way he does this, just there, you know, when we arrive there, of course, you all know the text, so you know that he doesn't do, that he doesn't conclude. But I find so compelling the way he does it, this Bruch cadence, this broken cadence, this by not resolving, you know. So we have, and so we expect, of course, we are ready to go there, and instead of that, he does. And I mean, all great composers do this, and it is in a way probably in lesson 5 of harmony that if you want to continue a phrase, if you want to not arrive somewhere, you break the cadenza in order to prolong the phrase. But what Bach will do now gets even more interesting, because so he gets us stuck there. And then actually we could also conclude here, right? And instead we stay in still, and instead of doing this sort of this banal thing, we will arrive to our A minor chord, but and so that we arrive to our A minor chord, but in a much softer way, in a much smoother way. And the reason he does this is that from there he wants to he wants to, we are still looking for something, we are still at the beginning of the piece, so we come, hello C major, we came back to C major, F major, and also here he brings us with this very smooth movement back to actually to C major, and in this way this is also very similar to what he does in the first prelude. We only did a small modulation, a gorgeous one, to this A minor episode, but we are already back in C major. We are already back home in a way, and we are only 1/3 of this prelude. And now comes one of my other favorite passages, which is this, again, a sequence, this time a rising one. Remember we had the one at the beginning, and now we are going to rise to arrive to our plateau, to our pedal of dominant, which is also what happened in the first prelude, and we are going to have a glorious long pedal of dominant. And I want to talk about one aspect of this sequence that we have now to get there. That what's very beautiful in the detail is how Bach gives us one harmony from above and one from the fundamental, from the bass note. And I want to take a little moment for this, because you remember we talked a lot, it's been a long time we didn't talk about Arno Belsma, right? Joking, yeah, so we talk about him all the time, but and you remember that one of the things that he taught us is that in this extraordinary art that Bach has to use this presentation of the harmony in time, like one note after each other, which is what he's doing here. I'm not playing chords. Yes, that when a harmony is presented from the top note before the actual bass note is presented, that this is something that gives more expression. And this is something that that could guide you in how you balance your left foot and your right foot in this going up with this sequence. So this one is more simple, more expressive. And then we come to this in French there is a word débauche. I don't know how to say it, this extraordinary generosity of G pedal, which is extraordinary. So one last word about this chord from above and from underneath. I've heard sometimes some students and sometimes some great masters say, oh, actually what Bach is doing here is that he's playing with the pulse, and every second bar actually he wants a... Well, I want to say one thing. For me there is no such thing in interpretation as wrong and right. But again, if we look at the canons of that time, of how music, on what it is based, if we play like this, we actually break one of the first, we actually break the first article of our constitution. Remember what we talked about at the beginning? Because in a way this main pulse, this bass line is actually first, and this 3-4 meter is our first article of the Constitution. So, by the standards of this music, of how it is actually constructed, I dare to say that it would be wrong to actually play always the bass as though it was a downbeat, as though it was the beat, even when it's not. Nevertheless, and I want to insist on this, I of course wouldn't say that playing like this is in absolute wrong, because it's a bit like making the choice, which is absolutely fine, to put a cubistic, for example, element and to confront it with a Baroque object of art. And sometimes this can be very fruitful, and this can be, so it can be absolutely a cellist of the 21st century who says, oh, I bring in something that is actually rather jazzy, that is rather something from the 20th century into a work of the 18th century. It's absolutely perfectly fine, but I think you should know it, because then maybe you will do it even better if you are aware of this, and that it's stylistically wrong. But sometimes we can decide to do something stylistically wrong as a dialogue, because we are playing in 2020, and why not insert some little bit something Stravinsky-ish into Bach if we decide to do it. That's I prefer, for me, it has more charm to taste the subtlety of that's for me, that's part of the charm, that the bass is not on the beat, and I don't want I don't have the need or the desire to do it otherwise. So this was it about this subject. Now, yes, we have this beautiful pedal that you all know. So we have really celebrated G major, and now we are going to sort of above through sort of something like 8 bars. We will calm down going down, you know, going down even more. And we are now C major, really low and calm down. And of course it wouldn't be Bach, and it wouldn't be a prelude of Bach without the last rising, which sorry, I didn't know anymore where I was. We go from the very bottom. Hello, F major. And now this big bass solo with these chords. See how he creates energy by playing on big intervals. And we go still down the bass. I strongly encourage you this fingering, dear friends cellist, so that you can keep the D resonating when you play this chord. Because if you do, you hear there is a D down there. I don't know if you hear it with Zoom, but I hope so. And one more celebration by going through the subdominant. And by putting the most dissonant chord we actually are allowed to play in this music, which is diminished seventh put on the tonic. Motif from the beginning, and then the final chord to really fully celebrate. Before I go on to invite our guest of the day for our discussion, there was a very interesting question by Antonio Jesus Delgado, who sent a question about, you know, in the pedal passage, you know, he said that some cellists play instead of, some cellists play, and dear Antonio Jesus, you were mentioning in your question, you were already answering an important point by saying that none of the sources has a G like this. But some great cellists, including Janos Starker, Alisa Weilerstein, and others, play this G. Well, it's a very simple, it's really a sort of technical solution that if you feel that you cannot, if you are not going to feel that you can really make this octave in this low register, it's a lot of stretching, and if you feel that it's not going to be satisfying in terms of sound, there is nothing wrong about the G. But if you can manage the octave, it's of course better. So in short, this G is a technical solution, a good one, to a technical problem, but if you can play the original text, of course, it is better. It is now my great pleasure to welcome the organist and composer Bernard Foccroulle, who is on his beautiful island of Belle-Île near Bretagne. And I hope that the connection will be better than before when we were trying it. We had a little bit of challenges in terms of the connection. So, dear Bernard, is the beautiful island, the gorgeous island of Belle-Île, now connected to the world? Is the Wi-Fi better than it was?
I see you and I hear you perfectly, but I wonder whether you hear me. Yes?
We do. Wonderful. Wonderful. Dear Bernard, welcome. Thank you for taking time from, particularly on such a beautiful scenery like Belle-Île. It would be much nicer to walk on this absolutely paradisiac island. So thank you even more for taking the time. So I guess I'm sorry, this is going to be a very obvious my first question is going to be a very obvious question. So you are an you fill in two of the two main boxes of Bach. You are a composer and you are an organist. So and the organ being, I guess, probably the instrument where you can the most celebrate harmony in the most really like embracing it without limits, by taking all the register and having all these notes, all these pipes sending sounds to us and creating harmony. What is your look? How do you look at these Bach suites where we play scarce notes one after the other? I don't know, what do they represent for you? How do you see them?
For me, these suites are miracles, because you are right. When I play organ music, I'm used to play 3 voices, 4, 5, sometimes 6 voices, a very rich polyphony, full polyphony. And in this prelude, for example, with the exception of the end, you mainly play 1 note at a time, and it is so rich also, but in a different way. So what is really a miracle in this music is how Bach is able to create from a monody a virtual polyphony. And in this particular piece, it's very beautiful to see how he's starting with a very simple scale of C major, and step by step going into a sort of a 2 voices polyphony, and then sometimes 3, 4 voices, even some moments of dialogue as you played at a certain point, and then going to the most accomplished polyphony with the 4 strings and 4 voices. But even if there are many pieces where the polyphony remains virtual until the end, and I think this sort of minimalism in terms of polyphony is so subtle and so beautifully thought and written that in a way I am jealous as an organ player of that polyphonic quality, even if it's more virtual. And I see it as a little bit as an abstract quality, where in the big chorales, for example, 6 voices, aus tiefer Not schrei ich zu dir, you have a permanent, almost permanent texture of 6 voices. But I think this prelude in itself is as miraculous as the most rich piece for organ by Bach or for harpsichord. So I think, and you were speaking about freedom, also mentioning the Constitution, the French and American Constitution. I think this specific polyphonic quality of the violoncello or the violin gives probably more freedom to the listener. We can we are more free to enter the music than if we are facing a six voices full polyphony.
That's probably one of the reasons I probably mentioned this in one of the workshop, but when I recorded the suite about 12 years ago or something like this, and then there was an event for the when the CD was released, and at the FNAC in Paris, and I apologize, my dear listeners out there, if I'm repeating myself, but it was such a revealing experience for me that and I had some time. I was a bit in advance, so I went to see. It was a big. At that time, it was all CD. There was no streaming and things like this. So I went. There was a lot, and I said, oh, let's look what they have. In terms of Bach suites, cello suite recordings. And then I looked, and then I panicked. It was like Bach cello suite was like there were 50 different versions there, the great master, the young ones, everybody, and I really thought, oh my God, why did I record them? It doesn't. But it's fascinating how many people are curious about seeing, oh, there is yet another way to interpret this. There is yet another way, and probably, as you just said now, there is yet another way to listen to them. Yeah, and it's interesting while I'm doing these workshops and so to say in dialogue with people about how maybe giving some tips about how to interpret or something. Nevertheless, I am so happy to know that I think that even by looking at the same material and maybe looking at it in a more accurate way, how it is constructed by Bach, that then from there will be so many different ways to interpret because of what you just mentioned, because of this of this horizontality of the harmony. Yeah.
And I was very sensitive to what you said about the moments where the harmony is not explicitly heard on the beat, when it's more virtual, and then after the bass is coming. I think with the organ that would almost never happen, because most of the time the bass is together, with the other voices. Not always, but most of the time. And of course, the fact that the harmony is changing subtly from the upper note makes it much more interesting. And I like that very, very much. And I think it makes also more changes in the texture than if you just make the beginning of the harmony just on the beat. Another thing that's very striking in this piece is the very strong dominant pedal. And in most pieces I know, especially in the organ and harpsichord literature, I would say a dominant pedal is there to prepare the tonic pedal or to prepare the last perfect cadenza. It's not the case here. And I find it very interesting, and I find a little bit of humor by Bach. We are not facing Scarlatti or Haydn, who are maybe musicians with more humor than the big Bach, but still, I see it quite. I find it very interesting to see how this dominant pedal develops and develops and develops, but doesn't lead to what it should lead, And I think that the very from this big expansion going into something much more subtle before going back to the C major chord at the end is very is astonishing. It's very amazing.
That's very, very good point. I never really paid attention to that. That it's true that in a way it's not just before that, but it's in the heart actually of the prelude. And then, as you say, there is an episode where he's still greets the D minor, F major, where we travel and we go. Yeah, yeah, that's.
I think in 99% of the pieces, the dominant pedal would be just before the end and leading to the conclusion. Here it's not. It's like an object in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it's like un objet trouvé, you know,
Yeah.
something it's there, and then you do something very beautiful with it, and you even make it bigger than if it was just at the end, maybe. And then the contrast with what is coming just after is just amazing, striking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's great, and that's going to be very helpful for us cellists to be more aware of this, uh, in how to construct
Yes.
our interpretation. Wonderful,
And
wonderful.
another thing that I find very, very interesting in these pieces for cello, but the same, a little bit the same with the French pieces by Marin Marais, for example, for the viola da gamba.
Mhm.
It's how a monodic or mostly monodic instrument like the cello is able to dialogue with with itself. And there are beautiful moments. In the organ, for example, the dialogue would be between two keyboards. And there are pieces influenced by, for example, Vivaldi, where one keyboard is playing the solo parts and the other is more playing the ripieno, the tutti part. You don't have exactly that with the cello, but you have moments of dialogue that are very intimate and absolutely amazing. And I think this kind of dialogue quality is very unique, probably in both the violin and the cello pieces, maybe also the flute. But I was very uh, interested in hearing your performance or the presentation of it at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's why these pieces are quite unique in that way, in the way they challenge us. They challenge us to be orchestral, to be different characters, to have different characters in us, and I think this is what's so exciting. I'm not saying nobody else did. For example, I mean, Britten definitely uh, um, inspired himself 250 years later from that in his cello suites, and he is and he's making use of that, of having voices that really dialogue with each other, and that would be interesting to make a Britten
And
suites workshop one day. No, sorry,
yeah.
that was.
And also, I think if we think that minimalism is an art movement that is very much linked with the second part of the 20th century, especially in music, but also in painting and in other art
Mhm.
forms. I think here with the cello suites and with this piece, for example, particularly, we have a wonderful example of minimalism from the Baroque time, but a minimalism where really less is more, you know. And I think being a cellist must be just wonderful to work with that and to work with that feeling that between the lines. I think when you in the opera, for example, it's always interesting to look at what the singer is singing, but the music is very often interesting by coming between the words, between the lines. And I think this is a comparable feeling with this music, that not everything is said explicitly. It gives you a freedom as a performer, and it gives us, as an audience, and also a freedom in going through and between the lines and building our own understanding of the piece.
Wonderful, absolutely. I totally agree, and that that we, more than, let's say, in a more uh, uh, harmonic piece with piano or with orchestra or something, we 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 worked a lot, as you say, between the notes, and also with silence. So that's very, very interesting. Bernard, for my last question would be, until now I didn't want to insist too much or go too much at the subject of the circumstances in which we now live and the dramatic events of the last month. I only evoked it very briefly in the very first workshop, and that's it. But I thought maybe today I would ask you, because you not only are an organist and a composer, but you also directed for many years one of the greatest festivals in the world, the Aix-en-Provence Festival, and you developed it in an extraordinary way. So, and of course, these particularly these very big, powerful festivals are probably the most affected by what's happening now, and we now see with what's happening in different countries, in different rhythms, that we are going to be stuck with this probably for a while. So have you, maybe now I'm asking all of the persons in you, like we just said now when we play a Bach suite, we are different characters, but I'm asking the musician, the composer, but also the festival director, artistic director. Do you see, have you, I'm sure you have thought a lot about what's happening now. Do you see potential new ways to create, and how do you see us musicians taking on this huge challenge that's happening now for the music world?
Maybe that we should listen to Bach's lesson. If less can be more, what does that mean for our lives? I think it can mean a lot of things. And probably we are coming out of a period of time where we have been looking for as much and as many possibilities as possible, possibilities in traveling, possibilities in actions, in going to these things, and looking for a multiplicity of experiences, which was probably a wonderful period. Maybe we should prepare ourselves to look at it differently. And there are constraints coming from the planet, constraints coming from the way to live together, where maybe we have to be prepared to do less, but to enjoy more, and to this minimalistic experience maybe should be a way, a new way to look at, not only to look at music, but to look at the nature, to look at the real life. And in that sense, I very much believe that art can be a very inspiring way to look at the reality. You know, big artists like Bach have been always influenced by the real life, but as a sort of a feedback, they could influence us in looking at the reality in different ways. And from that point of view, I think that the cello suites maybe are inviting us today, especially today. Maybe it would have been a different experience 20 years ago. But today, in 2020, maybe this music is inviting us to look at the world in a different way. And that's where masterpieces are so inspiring, because it's never ended. You never can say, no, that's it. You know, I think they are always revealing new things. And maybe from that point of view, I think it's beautiful to see how this extraordinary music can bring us into a different attitude to the world, and to the planet, to the humankind, and to the nature.
Thank you so much, dear Bernard. So everybody out there, did you hear? The solution to coronavirus is the Bach suite. So we keep going. I'm joking, but thank you so much, dear Bernard. Dear friends, next week my guest will be my last teacher when I was studying in New York, Timothy Eddy, and who had also, I would say, along Belsma, a very dramatic influence on my way to perceive this music. So I look so much forward also to this dialogue, and of course we will talk about the Allemande of the third suite next Friday, 7 o'clock European time. Thank you. See you soon.